Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have Allyson Apsey on with me. And I have to say, I asked her to be on this podcast because she has written a book called Leading the Whole Teacher. And how perfect is that to be on Coaching the Whole Educator, right? Like another human that really acknowledges that our educators deserve that holistic support, just like we want to support the whole child. And so I'm excited to talk with her. She has six pillars around leading the whole teacher. So we're going to talk about them today. But before we jump into that, I first of all wanted to welcome you to the show, Allyson.
Well, thank you. It is such a joy to get connected because obviously we're such kindred spirits in our mission in supporting educators. So I'm just really happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, me too. All right. So I'd like you to share with everyone what's been your journey in education. How did you start in education and where have you ended up and why? Why do you do what you do now?
Just like everybody, like there's been so many twists and turns, but I'm going to try to be concise in that I started as a student who graduated from high school saying like, I don't know what I want to do, but I never want to step foot back in there again.
Mm-hmm.
And through my college journey, I ended up taking an educational psychology class and had to go into a classroom to do observations. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is actually an opportunity to provide at least a year that would be need satisfying, empowering to these students so that they could feel good about themselves as learners in a K-12 school. So I became a teacher, and then I got tapped on the shoulder to become a leader. And so I spent 19 years as a principal of all levels. I started a blog called Serendipity in Education in 2015 that led to books, that led to just this opportunity to engage with educators beyond the school buildings that I was leading in these conversations about how do we nurture our students and create an environment where they can thrive, and then how do we nurture our staff and create an environment where they can thrive. So I know this speaks to your heart. A couple of years ago, I moved from Michigan to Georgia, and in that process, my side hustle became my full-time work. And now I travel the country and speak and coach and consult and work alongside educators from literally coast to coast. Hopefully not coast to coast in the same week, but that happens sometimes.
That does happen. We were just talking
Yeah.
about that.
Yes. And that like leads me here. That's my journey in a snapshot.
I love that. Okay. Cool. So we're gonna dive right in here. So you've written this book, Leading the Whole Teacher, right? And in the book, you talk about there are six pillars to leading the whole teacher, right? And so before
Yes.
we go into them, I'd love you to share how did you go about identifying those six pillars?
Yeah. So, I'm not an educational researcher by
Hmm.
nature, but I
Yeah.
became an educational researcher because of my writing and my work. Um, Not nearly as talented as many other educational researchers out there. Like I do the digging. They do like creating the studies. I find the studies, right? And over the course of several years, 19 years as a principal, it became a passion. I understood after a few years that there is a building full of adults to take care of the children. There's only one person who really is there to take care of the adults. And if I didn't do that, if I didn't create an environment where they can do their best work, then we're not going to take care of the children in the way that we can. The education will not be what it could be. So I recognize that that is actually my primary role. Like I loved kids, but my primary role as a building leader was to lead the adults so that they can lead the kids. And there's more nuances to that than just that simple statement. But over the course of several years, I did the digging and the research to find out like, what do they say? What does research say about creating a school environment where adults can thrive and or staff members can thrive? And there's not a ton out there, which is not surprising, but there is a ton of research out there about creating work environments where
Yeah,
employees can
like
thrive. And of
organizational
course,
culture.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And of course, there's so many connections between that research and its implications in schools. So I dug into that research, but I also just threw things out there. Like it's like, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
I threw questions out there to educators of, what do you need from an environment? Or even more specific questions of what is a healthy workload in your mind? And I got lots of feedback. I got some pushback on my ideas. I'm able to travel and to speak with educators across the country in person also. So all of those stories and experiences coupled with the research led to the 6 pillars of the whole teacher. And I knew I landed on the right 6 pillars when I would say them to an educator and you could see them like visibly relax.
Yeah.
Their body language was like, I feel seen. Yes.
Mhm.
If I had an environment that provided me these 6 things, I could do my best work for
Mhm.
students.
Yeah. I love that you said that, like, around, I think you're in my work, like the physical relaxation when something hits is
Yeah.
it's not talked about enough. That, like, how do you know something landed? And often there's a actual neurological and somatic, right? A body response to being seen and heard. And people make more eye contact, their shoulders are like, sometimes they cry. Like, there's an actual, sometimes involuntary, many times involuntary response to feeling seen.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mhm.
Yep. I've seen that also.
Yeah. So let's go right into these pillars. I'd love you to share what are the 6 pillars, and then we're gonna kind of dive deep into a few of them. So what are the 6 pillars?
Okay. So they are valued,
Hmm.
continuous learner,
Hmm.
emotional safety,
Hmm.
decision maker, positive relationships, and healthy workload.
Hmm. Okay, perfect. So I'd love to talk about valued first. What does that mean? What does that look like, in terms of, like, how does the teacher, how does it look and feel for the teacher? How do leaders accomplish that? What's the world around valued as a pillar?
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said seen and heard.
Mhm,
Like we feel valued when we feel known.
mhm,
And it's so interesting because I'm not sure when this episode will be released,
mhm,
but as we're recording it, Teacher Appreciation Week is coming up.
mhm.
And so there's all sorts of talk among school leaders about how are we going to appreciate our teachers during this week. And I did the same thing. Like I am a proponent of going all in and going big during Teacher Appreciation Week. But I also think it's important to recognize that when we ask teachers what helps them feel valued at school, they never mention taco bars or jeans days or candy or like hidden objects in the school to win gift cards. They never mention any of those things. Now they're fun and
Yeah.
they help with the culture and they
Mhm,
help with relationship, but they don't necessarily help teachers feel valued individually. And
mhm,
s- and I was guilty of this too. Like, our Quincy crew is the best. Like we're amazing. That can help with the culture. It
mhm,
does not help individuals feel valued until they feel seen for their strengths, for their passions, for the areas that they want to grow in individually. And that takes a lot of communication.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does. Communication, listening, right? Part of communication, a big part. I'd say the biggest part of communication is listening.
Right, right,
Bigger than speaking. Well, yeah, no, it does take communication, right? And like, and really understanding what motivates people, and letting them know, I see you. I see you, and very often you are different than me, and I see those differences and I value those differences.
right,
So,
right.
no, I love that. Yeah, thank you for giving that distinction around feeling valued versus, like, popcorn carts during the pandemic. I was
Yeah,
like, oh my gosh, I was on a if you look at my social media posts, I had so many, like, I was just like, feeling seen and heard is not jeans days. And
right.
it
Yes,
was I was, like, on a rampage of, like, because schools are scrambling to support their teachers and not knowing what to do, so they were bringing around the popcorn cart, and I'm like,
right,
"It's fun, but that's not the thing teachers need."
right. Like simply, and to your point of listening as
Mhm.
the most important part of communication, like simply asking the question of like, what's getting in the way of doing your best work?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and hearing that and then taking action
mhm,
based on their response.
and
Like,
not judging
that's
it.
how people feel valued.
Mhm.
Yes.
I love that. Okay. So let's talk about emotional safety. I'm so interested. What does that look like for teachers to have it? And then how do leaders and coaches bring that?
Yeah, yes. So one of the things that I started doing like back in 2017 as I was presenting and working with the various groups is asking the question, what might make a teacher feel unsafe at school?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I asked using a tool that you might be familiar with. It's Mentimeter.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
Mentimeter has a function where the responses can be in a word cloud. So
Hmm.
it's pretty cool because I have word clouds from groups all over the country, from groups of principals, groups of teachers, groups of support staff, you name it. Like I'll have a word cloud from them. And it's so interesting. I asked it when the pandemic was at its peak. I asked this question when our news was full of school violence. And every time I asked the question, the things that came out largest in the center of that word cloud were interpersonal issues. So it was
Hmm.
gossip, it was judgment, it was, lack of support, which that's a whole discussion in itself because support means something different to everybody, which is
Hmm.
tricky as a leader. Um, and when I work with groups of principals, often what they'll say and what comes out in the center is teacher evaluation. And teachers will say that too. But
Hmm.
I was like you on your social media about teacher appreciation not being popcorn carts. When a group of 200 Michigan principals put teacher evaluation largest in the center of that word cloud, I like got on my soapbox like no other because I was like, you guys, the state gives us guidance for teacher evaluation, but the state does not tell us how it should feel to teachers. We
Exactly.
how teacher evaluation should
Love that you're
feel.
saying this right now so much.
I know we're like, yeah, I knew I would be
Yeah.
like to the choir here, and I'm sure to all of your listeners. But we have this golden opportunity to use teacher evaluation as a way to help teachers feel valued, but also as a way to create emotional safety, because so
Mhm.
often those evaluation systems create a sense of a lack of safety. And
Mhm.
when a principal or an evaluator walks into the room, all of a sudden, look, my guard
Mhm.
is up. I'm rethinking everything I do, and my performance
Mhm.
is at its worst
Yeah.
rather than having to be at its best.
Mhm.
But then the other piece of that emotional safety, when we're talking about interpersonal issues, like I had a group of teachers who put bullying in the center. They weren't
Mm.
talking, they were not talking about students.
Mhm.
They were talking about adults bullying each other or like cliques. And
Mhm.
and we have to nurture that as
Mhm.
leaders, as staff, as coaches in our school environments, because we have to recognize what's getting in the way of emotional safety and
Mhm.
then make a plan for, all right, how can we address this collectively? Because it
Mhm.
cannot be the leader's responsibility alone. One person
Mhm.
cannot run around and fix all these interpersonal issues on their
Mhm.
own. So it has to be like a culture, a community, a collaborative thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I really appreciate you. Yeah, I really love that you asked like what makes you feel unsafe, instead of what makes you feel safe, right? Because we actually often know much clearer what makes us feel unsafe. Like that's it's like front of mind because our amygdala gets triggered, right? So we have our prefrontal cortex, is like our smart part of our brain, and then when we feel unsafe, we essentially flip our lid, our amygdala hijack takes over, and it's like we're in survival mode, and we know those moments where we're in survival mode with someone. It doesn't surprise me that it's interpersonal that came up, and it's just most often not talked about.
Right.
That is the thing that causes, and it's subtle, right? So like things that I've seen coaches do that they think it's great coaching moves actually
Yeah.
makes it unsafe. So a coach recently, I was working with a coach who she just, when teachers would come to her, she just immediately gave them advice, which is like pretty common. I see with coaches,
Right?
I'm like, hey, that's not coaching, that's advice giving. Right. But that can, when you are off the bat, someone comes to you with a problem and you're off the bat always giving them advice, even if they didn't ask, unsolicited advice, definitely causes people to
Right.
feel unsafe, right? Like, just to start to question, is the way that I'm communicating and the way I'm even holding these kinds of conversations, is there a lack of safety here? And you can start to tell, like people say, well, how do I know? Look at the other person. Do they
Right.
have, are they defensive? Is their body language? Are their arms crossed? Is their
Yeah.
foot shaking? Right? Look and feel, be out here, be out, skin out, right? Not skin in. Don't be in your head. Be out here and pay attention to their energy, to their body language, and start to read the situation. Do they feel
Right.
unsafe? And then start to question, what about this interaction, this interpersonal interaction, is causing a lack of safety?
Right. Right. And you just made me think of an article by Michael Bungay Stainer, who
Yes,
has
I love him.
he's amazing. And I mean, he said like 98% of our advice is bad. And we don't
Yes.
want to accept that as leaders or as coaches because we're
Mm.
in this spot because we're pretty smart. We got lots of
Yes.
great ideas and
Yes.
we want to help people, but we don't recognize that what we're really looking for is, and this is a nod to cognitive coaching, like that cognitive shift is
Mhm,
what we're
mhm,
looking for. And if
mhm,
we shut people down by
mhm,
throwing advice at them that's not hitting the mark, you can like even verbally, like I notice when I'm working with a group, as I'm asking them questions and helping them probe deeper, as soon as I say, would you be interested in an idea? All of a sudden they sit back. You can just even see, and then they stop talking and stop
mhm,
sharing. And of course, sometimes we do have to share ideas. But again, waiting for that kind of opening or that invitation is really important. And Michael Bungay Stainer calls it calling your advice monster.
mhm. Yep,
That bubbles
exactly.
up all the
Yep,
time.
yep.
Yes.
I love that. And he wrote a whole book, The Advice. There's the coaching habit nods to the advice monster, and then the advice trap is all about the advice monster. Highly
Right.
recommend that book. I love that. I integrate some of that thinking in my PDs because it's just, anyway, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about continuous learner. What does that look like and feel like? How do we create that for teachers to want to be continuous learners?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's a great question. And we think we have the answers because we think continuous learning means our professional development plans that we create as a district and then we create as a school. But really, we're talking about how can we support teachers in learning and growing in ways that are meaningful to them, in ways that they want to learn and grow.
Mhm.
And the first thing to do is to ask them,
Yeah.
and sometimes they're like, oh, my professional development goals are this, but really what I'm working on is this. Well,
Mm.
it'd be lovely if those professional development goals were genuine and were
Yeah.
tied to what you actually want to work on. Um, so I just worked with a group of teachers and we did action research. So we learned together about effective and ineffective grading practices,
Mhm,
and we said, what's a challenge in your classroom that you want to address? So
mhm,
they got to come up with it. They got to research and develop the practice they wanted to put in place. And
yeah.
then they took a look at the results. And the response from them is, this is the most meaningful professional development I've ever had because it hit the mark in a challenge that they identified. They were able to address the challenge in a way that stretched them,
Mhm,
but not too much. They
mhm.
would say to me,
Yeah.
Allison, I don't know if I can do this. And so my response is, well, what can you do? What are you
Mhm.
comfortable doing now? And they
Yeah.
took that action step, and that just opened the door to, like, then they have these ideas. Okay, next I'm going to do this, and next I'm going to do this.
Mhm,
So it's really engaging teachers in that, from day one of what do you want to learn and grow? Like I saw on Facebook, a principal said, give me an idea for a great book study for my team. And people were giving great books to study as a
mhm.
team. And I didn't respond, but maybe I'll go back. And I wanted to respond about how about ask teachers? What are they interested in
Yes.
learning? Buy them a book that hits the mark for what they're interested in learning, and then have them share out
Mhm.
what they're learning with the rest of the team. That's going to
Yeah.
be a way more meaningful book study
Yeah.
than doing one altogether. Um,
Exactly.
just one other piece is that often we're trying to do way too much.
Yeah.
We're trying to solve all the problems right now And that means we solve none of the problems right now. And if we have a laser focus on 2 or 3 goals, get to work with the magnificent Dr. Douglas Reeves, and he says no more than 6 initiatives at a time for
Mm-hmm.
areas of focus. So we need to weed that garden and say, what can we get rid of? And what can we focus on and pour all of our effort into so that we can actually see some progress?
Mm-hmm. Something that I have a colleague of mine that says we need to make tiny tweaks and micro movements, and
Mhm.
I love that. And I say it all the time. And I'm working with this amazing group of coaches right now, and we've been working with them on making tiny tweaks and micro movements with their teachers. And something I've at the beginning of working together, what they actually stopped doing this, but right at the beginning, what would happen is I'd set a goal with the teacher, like a modeling for the coach. I'd set a goal with the teacher, and it was a tiny tweak. They would go achieve that goal like in a week, or it's tiny. And then when I would be debriefing with the coach, and they would say, "Yeah, but there's all these other things that
Mhm.
that need," and I'm like, "Hold on, let's stay focused." Right? Did that one tiny tweak that we set a goal, did we achieve that? Yes. Okay, great. Now let's move to another tiny tweak, because we'll get to all of
Right.
them. But really celebrating and staying focused on those tiny tweaks instead of all because if we keep looking at all the things that need to be improved, yeah, we're going to keep being disempowered and frustrated, because big major overhauls are not the way we create sustained change. That's
No.
when we try to do that, that's when they go back to their old ways.
Right. And that also is aligned with the research on the science of hope. And
Hmm.
setting and accomplishing micro goals builds that sense of hope, which another
Hmm.
way to say hope is self-efficacy. Like
Hmm.
sometimes we mistake the idea of hope as wishing, and
Hmm.
that's not what hope is. Hope is the belief that I can take action that will make a progress toward my goal or a better tomorrow. And that's the same thing as self-efficacy. And when we do those tiny tweaks and achieve them, we're building, and then success builds upon success. Yes,
Hmm. Yeah,
100%.
yeah. I love that. Signs of hope. That's really interesting. I love that. Okay, so the last pillar I want to talk about is positive relationships. So I'd love you to share, clearly all my listeners know, if you are still listening to this podcast, I'm just like, you got to build relationships and trust, period. End of story. So I don't want to, everyone knows we need to do this, right? It's not like what? But I want to talk about how. How do you talk about different ways? It's not like these are the only ways that leaders and coaches can build positive relationships with teachers.
Yes, I'm just going to share one very specific way because I know this is a topic that you talk about with your listeners all the time. But one of the things that we instituted with students was a daily check-in. And this is many schools are doing this, like, how are you feeling today? And do you need some support? So we might use Leah Kuyper's zones of regulation, or whatever, smiley faces, frowny faces, whatever we might use. And we were having a meeting with a group of teachers talking about this and how it was working with students. And one of the teachers said, I would love to have a check-in. And
Mm.
I'm like, that is brilliant, a brilliant idea. But I'm careful with implementing brilliant ideas because I don't want to add to the workload to teachers. I don't want what I think is an idea that's going to support them to really actually be something that they're just adding to the to-do list and checking off the to-do list. So I went around to teachers and said, what do you think of this idea? And they were very honest with me. And they're like, Allyson, don't use any fancy technology for it. Like, if you're going to do it in Google form and just send the Google form to us. And then they are like, keep it 1 or 2 questions.
Mhm.
Don't, make it lengthy. So I started this before the pandemic as a principal. And I just said, I sent it out on a Monday morning and said, how are you feeling about the week ahead? I
Mhm.
scheduled it. So it just went out at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. And the
Right.
responses were, I'm feeling great, ready to roll. I'm doing okay. I got a lot of work to do. I could use some TLC, like, so that was like, see me when you get a chance,
Mhm.
or help me. I need something. And then they would put something in the comments. So just 4 responses. And, Google Forms then go into Google Sheets. So I
Mhm.
would just pull the Google Sheet, say like after the day settled in, 9:30, 10 a.m., and go through to see who needed support.
Mhm.
Um, at the same time, I would also bop around to as many classrooms as I could.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
like a safety net. And it
Mhm.
went out to all staff. So I didn't see all the bus drivers. I didn't see like all
Mm.
the people who are serving breakfast. I didn't see everybody every morning. So they were all able to respond. And I just had a super easy system where I would just, if it was, I need some TLC, I'd mark it yellow, like Allyson,
Mhm.
get to it sometime soon. And if it was, I need help right now, I'd mark it red and I'd go take
Mhm.
care of it. And then at the end of the day, I just had that sheet up all day. I would change it all to green, the yellows and the reds to green after I had addressed them. Once in a while, there might be a yellow or red I hadn't addressed, and
Mhm.
I would text I would go see if they're still there. I would
Mhm.
text the teacher and say, "Hey, I noticed this. Do you want to do a phone call, or do you want me to see you first thing in the morning?" So just like, I think you nodded along when we said like take action. Like don't ask that question unless you have a system for how you're going to follow up. And
Mhm.
it was not mandatory to respond. And I had
Mhm.
about 80% of staff responding every single Monday. And that was interesting information at the end of the year. Like how
Mhm.
often were each of
Mm.
these, and was there like different times of the year where they responded differently? So that was a way for me to stay
Mhm.
connected and have
Mhm.
positive relationships. And I think there's there's value in that idea, of course, for school leaders. My superintendent started using it
Mhm.
with the principals, but I think there's
Mhm.
also value for coaches in using that
Mhm.
kind of
For
frequent check-in.
sure. For sure. I mean, that can totally be done by a coach.
Yes.
Why not? And there is a foundation of trust and relationship that needs to happen before a coach does send that out. If teachers don't trust a coach, if there isn't psychological safety around being honest and vulnerable with someone, you're not going to get honest answers. You're going to be like, I'm doing, either they'll answer they're doing great or won't answer at all. So there does need to be
That's
kind of a foundation. Also that it would be kept confidential, all of that. But I have never heard of that, and I love this so much. So now that's like also in my own tool belt to be able to share with other coaches and leaders. So thank you so much for sharing that very concrete.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, it's just we talk about like building positive relationships, but then the question is how, right? Like
Right.
what are the
Right.
what are the strategies? So um but we're gonna be wrapping up here, and the question I want to end with is, what are some next steps that coaches and leaders listening can take to start to implement these pillars? What would you recommend?
So from a leader, a school leader perspective, or even like someone who's leading a department or a collaborative team, asking that question,
Mhm.
even using a tool like Mentimeter and creating a word cloud of what might make a teacher at ABC Elementary or ABC High School feel unsafe
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
it is a vulnerable question. Like I asked it as a principal, and I was like watching like with one eye open and one eye closed because I was nervous about what the response would be.
Mhm.
Um, but I also we have to have those honest, challenging conversations if we want to make the forward movement. I also have a tool on my website that is like a self-reflection form. So it gives a brief description of each of the pillars and then allows staff to rank their satisfaction in that pillar on a scale of 1 to 5. And then along with that, I have a slideshow that will guide leaders through having
Mhm.
that discussion, like in connecting staff members who have the same pillar as
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
strength, but
Yeah.
also then maybe one has a 5 and one has a 1, like have them have a conversation. What's the difference?
Mhm.
Again, this takes trust in the environment,
Yeah.
and it takes a level of vulnerability and
Mhm.
willingness to learn and grow from real data
Mhm.
from leaders and
Mhm.
coaches in order to have these conversations. But or to even a gentler start would be that conversation about over the course of the school year, where have you learned and grown in ways that have been meaningful to you?
Mhm. Mhm.
And what might that look like next year in your dream world? What
Mhm.
might that look like next year? And then
Mhm.
to see how many of those ideas we can pull forward into the next school year in the professional development plan.
I love this. This is so great. Thank you so much for coming and sharing just not only the pillars of supporting the whole teacher, right? But really concrete examples of what that could look like, right? And there's like an infinite number of ways. So I'd love you to share with everyone, where can they find you and your materials? And even if they want to contact you, where can they make all that happen?
Yeah, so if you know how to spell my name, which is a little tricky, and that my name is Allyson Apsey, and I'm ALLYSON APSEY. You can find me anywhere. So I try to keep it simple. So if you want to email me, it's AllysonApsey@gmail.com, or my website is AllysonApsey.com. And all the social medias, I'm at Allyson Apsey. And I am like, one of the best compliments I got after a keynote was somebody saying that was practical as, and she said a swear word, but um, for me, it's like I think we don't have time to mess around. Like, let's inspire each other. Let's talk about research and big ideas, but then let's talk about like how can we put these into practice tomorrow. So tons of practical ideas and principles. Coaches are busy, so I try to stick as many resources as possible on my website. So I would love to stay connected.
Yes, awesome. And I'll put all of that information in the show notes as well, so people can just head down there and click on links. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing what you know about supporting the whole
Thank you for
teacher.
having me.
This is great.